First, the war in Ukraine, and then the Hamas attack have dominated the international news. However, these are not the only hotspots to be found. Another region that almost never gives us a break is the Caucasus. Here on VisualPolitik, we've already told you a number of times about this small and conflictive region. The wars in Chechnya and the Kadyrov regime, the Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008, and the new energy role of Azerbaijan, vital for the European Union. On this occasion, however, we are going to deal with the possible end of the longest frozen conflict in the entire post-Soviet space. We are talking, of course, about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And I'm sure you all remember that not long ago we were seeing news stories like this.
Azerbaijan launched an attack on separatist groups in Nagorno-Karabakh, the disputed area with Armenia.
Indeed, VisualPolitik viewers, after more than 30 years, it seems that this bitter conflict is finally coming to the end. Nagorno-Karabakh, which, if you remember correctly, is this small mountainous region located between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and which is populated mainly by ethnic Armenians, has now been taken over by Azerbaijani troops. And okay, many of you may be wondering, but what does this matter to me? Well, what if I were to tell you that this seizure of Karabakh by Azerbaijan is a great victory for Turkey? What if I were to tell you that this is also a defeat for Russia? What's more, what would you think if I told you that this could lead to a serious conflict between Israel and Iran? VisualPolitik viewers, as small as the territory may be, the reality is that there are countless international interests in this region, and recent events could become a serious headache on the international agenda. But what exactly are the interests at stake in the South Caucasus? How did Azerbaijan finally take over Nagorno-Karabakh? Will this be the definitive end of the long-running conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan? Today we're going to answer these questions, but first let's start the story at the beginning.
An almost eternal conflict.
Nagorno-Karabakh is one of those historic territories that has passed through different hands throughout history. The Mongol Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Persian. However, in none of these episodes do we find the origin of this conflict. To do so, we have to go to the beginning of the Soviet Union. With the advent of the Soviet regime, Nagorno-Karabakh, which had declared its independence in 1918 and refused to be part of the Transcaucasian Republic of Azerbaijan formed in 1917, became part of the Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic in 1936 as an autonomous region. Since then, the dispute between Armenians and Azeris entered an impasse, sponsored by the Kremlin's Central Vigilance. However, with the imminent fall of the Soviet Union in 1988, the inhabitants of Nagorno-Karabakh, mostly ethnic Armenians, voted in a referendum to be annexed to the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic. Azerbaijan rejected this move and sent its troops into the territory. The First Karabakh War had begun, which would end in 1994 after Russian mediation. It resulted in about 30,000 lives being lost, hundreds of thousands of displaced persons, and Armenia taking control of Nagorno-Karabakh and 7 other neighboring provinces. From that moment on, Nagorno-Karabakh became one of the most tense and conflict-ridden regions in the world. Yes, it is true, Armenia had succeeded in ensuring that Nagorno-Karabakh was not controlled by Azerbaijan, but the Azeri regime was not going to give up. VisualPolitik viewers, although both countries launched different negotiation processes to try to find a solution to the conflict, the reality is that, for historical reasons, neither side was willing to give in. In the end, what everyone knew would happen ended up happening. A new war. In 2016, both countries tested their forces again with intense clashes that lasted 4 days. Even so, it was not until 2020 that war broke out again. Real war. On 27th of September, Azerbaijan began shelling Nagorno-Karabakh. Thus began the Second Karabakh War, which would last 44 days and kill 4,000 Armenian and Azerbaijani soldiers and displace more than 100,000 Karabakh Armenians. This war ended with a new agreement driven yet again by Russia. However, in September 2023, we witnessed once more the resounding failure of the ceasefire agreements between these two countries. Azerbaijan broke with the agreement and took control. But why did the agreement fail this time? Was there really a true desire for peace between the parties? What are the consequences of this action? Well, let's take a look.
The victorious Azerbaijan.
Armenia and Azerbaijan are like two brothers who refuse to give an inch when they both want the same thing, in this case, Nagorno-Karabakh. Over the years, they have had numerous ceasefires, which have always ended up failing to a greater or lesser extent. That is why the vast majority of analysts were right in predicting that the ceasefire reached in 2020 would also eventually break down. And, VisualPolitik community, the agreement had serious problems from the beginning. From the very start of the negotiations, both Armenia and Azerbaijan pointed out significant inconsistencies in the text of the agreement. For example, while one article allowed both countries to keep the territories gained in the conflict until the moment of signing the agreement, another indicated the obligation of the Armenian troops to withdraw. However, there were other problems regarding the implementation of the agreement itself. Armenia refused to agree to the creation of the Zanzagor corridor in the south of the country. On top of that, both countries refused to allow the return of all those displaced by the conflict to their homes safely, even with the support of UNHCR. What's more, Russia, which was in charge of monitoring peace between the two countries around the Lachin humanitarian corridor connecting Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh, and the border between the two countries, failed to effectively separate the troops from each other. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan were aware of how much a disaster the agreement was, and therefore foresaw the possibility of a new conflict in the future. In fact, far from bringing peace, do you know what the 2020 ceasefire agreement achieved? It resulted in both countries arming themselves even more. In fact, to give you an idea, in 2020, both invested around 5% of their GDP in military spending. As a comparison, in that same year, the global average was 2.4%. However, as you can see, the investment in absolute terms was much higher on the part of Azerbaijan. After all, in 2020, this country had a GDP that was more than 3 times higher than that of Armenia, all thanks to its significant oil sector. What's more, between 2011 and 2020, the volume of Azerbaijan's arms imports was 8 times higher than Armenia's. Crazy. And as I'm sure you can imagine, between the fateful 2020 agreement and the strong rearmament by both countries, tensions only increased. For example, in mid-September 2022, Azerbaijan attacked regions of southern Armenia. In fact, that September became the most hostile month since the 2020 war, with nearly 300 dead and 7,600 Armenians displaced. And that was not all. In December 2022, Azeri authorities decided to block the Lachin humanitarian corridor connecting Nagorno-Karabakh with Armenia, which has had serious repercussions for the Karabakh population.
We are starving to death. Residents of Nagorno-Karabakh fear for future under blockade. People are fainting, waiting for bread. The blockade that has 120,000 people isolated by the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict.
Azerbaijan's aggressions confirmed an almost absolute sense of impunity. Azerbaijan suffered practically no repercussions for its aggressions, and probably because of this, on 19th of September 2023, Azerbaijani troops entered Nagorno-Karabakh en masse. It took Azerbaijan 24 hours to take full control of the territory, and 24 hours passed until the fear of a possible ethnic cleansing against the Karabakh Armenians spread. This, of course, had immediate consequences.
More than 100,000 people have left Nagorno-Karabakh. Some 120,000 Armenians lived in the region before Azerbaijan recaptured it in a lightning operation, which forced the dissolution of the separatist republic.
Azerbaijan has insisted that the decision of the ethnic Armenians of Karabakh to leave the territory was entirely voluntary. But if we take a look at the track record of the Azeri regime, the reality is that these people surely had no other choice. Keep in mind that Azerbaijan is dominated by an authoritarian regime, where human rights and individual freedoms are conspicuous by their absence. A regime that has been nurturing hatred towards Armenians for decades, and did not hesitate to let them starve to death when it closed the Lachin corridor. Be that as it may, what we do know is that Azerbaijan now controls Nagorno-Karabakh. It seems that the longest running of the post-Soviet conflicts has come to an end. But the question is, how does this affect the powers near the South Caucasus? Are hostilities really over once and for all in this region? Well, let's take a look at the fine print, so to speak.
A Caucasian Cold War,
I'm sure many of you have probably thought at some point that this conflict is rather inconsequential, something of little relevance, just another conflict in another lost region of the world. Nevertheless, VisualPolitik viewers, the reality could be very different. In fact, did you know that the Armenia-Azerbaijan Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is a vivid reflection of the tensions between Russia and Turkey? What has happened in Karabakh is a perfect illustration of the Russian decline and the Turkish rising in the region. Why? Well, take a look. Russia has undoubtedly been the most active player in the South Caucasus since the fall of the Soviet Union. In fact, in 1994, it succeeded in bringing Azerbaijan and Armenia to a ceasefire. However, Russia has shown itself to be more supportive of Armenia than of Azerbaijan. For example, in 1997, the two countries signed a military alliance, allowing the construction of Russian bases in Armenia until 2044. As well as that, Armenia is part of the Collective Security Treaty Organization that Russia leads. However, this Russian support has been deteriorating in recent years. In 2020, for example, Russia decided to maintain an essentially neutral role in order to preserve its own interests. Perhaps we should not forget that Russia is the main arms supplier to both countries. This same neutrality has also been shown by Russia in the face of recent events. It's likely that with the Ukrainian war going on, they had no other choice. Armenia, aware of this situation, has sought to move ever closer to Washington, which of course has not gone down well in Moscow.
Armenian betrayal, how Russia's great ally ended up moving closer to the US. The Armenian government has begun military exercises with the United States amid rising tensions with Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh war.
In other words, with Armenia's estrangement from Russia, the Kremlin's role in the South Caucasus has been losing more and more influence. And do you know who has been able to seize this opportunity? Yes, indeed, Turkey. Turkey has traditionally been Azerbaijan's best ally. In 2009, for example, they signed a treaty obliging them to protect each other in case either one is attacked by another country. And not surprisingly, Turkish aid has come to Azerbaijan, above all in the form of weapons, F-16 fighters, infantry vehicles, Bayraktar drones. In fact, Azerbaijan's huge advances in the 2020 war were mainly thanks to all this Turkish aid. So, what is the reason for Turkey's assistance? Well, Turkey has strong interests in the region, interests that have been helped by Azerbaijan's recent victory in Nagorno-Karabakh. What interests are we talking about? Well, first of all, to understand what Turkey is seeking by supporting Azerbaijan, we have to understand that the South Caucasus is an area of particular strategic importance. If you look closely, it is located between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. That is, it controls the transport flow of the region from east to west and vice versa, and also from north to south, from Russia to other nations of the Indian Ocean. It is precisely this crucial zone where Turkey wants to have a greater influence than Russia for one single purpose: to connect with Central Asia. Turkey wants to connect to the vast Asian region directly via the Caspian Sea to benefit from Turkmenistan's large natural gas reserves and to boost new maritime trade projects. But do you know what else Turkey is interested in the region? Nothing less than overtaking another neighboring power, Iran. And you may be wondering, hang on, what does Iran have to do with this? Well, you see, Iran is also trying to strengthen its position in the South Caucasus in order to open a new trade route from the Persian Gulf to Georgia, and from Georgia to connect with Russia and Europe across the Black Sea. However, there is concern in Tehran that Azerbaijan may try to take advantage of its victory over Armenia to expand further into the region, even going so far as to block the Iranians' passage to Armenia if it closes the Zanzagor corridor, which would derail all their plans. That is why Iran has and will continue to position itself in favor of Armenia. And of course, Iran's presence never goes unnoticed. Do you know what other country has been involved in all this mess just because of Iran's interest? Exactly. One of its biggest geopolitical rivals, Israel. In fact, in 2020, Israel was Azerbaijan's second largest arms trading partner, providing roughly 27% of arms to the Caucasian country. So far, however, Israel's role in the region has not been as decisive as that of Turkey or Russia, but all that could be about to change. With the sudden escalation of hostilities between Israel and Palestine, following the brutal terrorist attack by Hamas, the geopolitical scene in the Near and Middle East is about to become a hotbed once again. We should keep in mind here that Iran has strong links, not only with Hezbollah terrorism in Lebanon, but also with Hamas in the Gaza Strip. If hostilities between Israel and Palestine continue to escalate, it is very likely that both Israel and Iran will intensify their particular Cold War to the point of affecting the South Caucasus as well. Israel supporting Azerbaijan and Iran supporting Armenia. So, you see, VisualPolitik viewers, Azerbaijan seems to be done with the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict once and for all. It has already taken over the entire territory, and Armenia does not seem to have enough forces to reverse the situation. However, while this conflict is drawing to a close, Armenia and Azerbaijan run the risk of being caught in the game of great powers such as Russia, Turkey, Iran, and Israel. Only time will tell. But until then, the questions are for you. Do you think Armenia will try to take Nagorno-Karabakh? Can Russia regain its influence in the South Caucasus? Will this small region be used as a stage for an indirect conflict between Iran and Israel? You can leave me your answers in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like the video, please like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best. See you soon.